Herb. Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything. Herb.
Welcome to Eugene Cannabis TV, episode 658, and we've got a special guest tonight. We have Mark with us with the Occupy Denver.
Oh, thank you,
and
Dan. Thank you for inviting me here.
Yes, and this is great. Mark came in and signed up on for Community Television 29 as a member, which is always encourage people to do. It's only $10 a year, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. And Mark hopes to be doing his own show, and which is great because we're always looking for shows for CTV 29. And Mark wants to do a show on jury nullification. So we'll be talking about that and cannabis issues.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, you bet. I really appreciate you coming in, Mark,
well,
and welcome.
It's a pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me.
You bet, you bet. So real quick announcement here. October 28th is the Eugene Pot Club's annual harvest party. And that's going to be at 420, believe it or not. And excuse me, it's on a Saturday, and that'll be at 3825 River Road. That's where we've had several events. If you know where that is, out River Road, just past River Loop 2, I think it is. So anyway, put it on your calendar, October 28th. You don't want to miss it. You join up to the Eugene Pot Club. It's very, very simple and real cheap. And we meet at a private residence, and the city leaves us alone. So after being harassed and our rights violated for the last year Millennium Power Hemp Fest, this is how we're doing it now.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully that you won't get your rights violated.
No. And it's interesting. Almost every event we have at least one person that tries to get in that we really think is a narc, but he can't get through our security.
Oh, okay.
Because we require membership and the sign fell out the form, and they don't want to fill out and we've always had at least one person that we really wonder about and didn't want to fill out the form and left. So we're thinking,
well, you always want to videotape them too.
Oh yeah, that's true. So anyway, excuse me. So how did you end up in Oregon, and what's up?
Well, the way I ended up in Oregon was I was with Occupy Denver, and we were handing out jury nullification and to everybody in the public in front of the courthouse, and I got arrested and charged with 7 Class 4 felonies of jury tampering. And I was looking at 21 years in prison. I went to jail. Occupy Denver moved in. They encamped it for like 31 days. There was SWAT police raids. There was more arrests. The judge threw it out, and then the district attorney appealed it to the Colorado Court of Appeals, which is connected with the Colorado Supreme Court. So for 3 years, I'm still walking around wondering if I'm going to get 21 years in prison for handing out jury nullification information. So,
well, where's the statute of limitation? When will that run out?
Well, there'll be a panel of judges that will look at the case, and of course they'll throw it out on the First Amendment right. But the police were targeting me, and they were trying to arrest me. And in Denver, you could easily get killed by the police. So my girlfriend said, you know, I got relatives in Oregon. Let's go to Oregon. I said, yeah, be safer there. So here I am.
Great. Well, it's our gain. So I'm glad you made it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Mark came in and wanted to do a show on jury nullification. So we're looking forward to that. And that's a really important issue. I've covered it on and off over the years a little bit. I did a story, and I wish I had my fingers on it. There was a guy who was in his 90s, and he was doing the same thing you are, same thing, and they busted him, and he went to court, and he beat him.
Oh, okay.
He won. And so, that and the fact that felons can vote in the state of Oregon. Those are two things that I just really got to keep educating about so people will know it.
Yeah, you know, people would tell me in Colorado, they said, well, I can't vote, I got a felony. And I said, well, no, they would tell me they couldn't be on the jury. And I said, well, you can be on a jury in Colorado with a felony, but you can't be on a grand jury. And they never knew it.
Yeah,
you know, the system doesn't want them to know because they might be better jurors than some of the other citizens that are out there.
Exactly, yeah. And I've always said that the felons I know will need to have a voice, because they need to speak out, because they've really been wronged in most cases.
Right.
And so they really need a voice to speak out. And so spread the word. Oregonians, you can vote as a felon in the state of Oregon. There's a specific law that says you can. So I made up a flyer and had it on the table for years and actually referenced the actual law, you know.
And can I say, you know, if it's a bad law made by bad politicians, you vote not guilty.
That's right.
And it's legal, you don't have to even tell anybody why. And that repeals bad law.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bring that in, please, and go up on that a little bit more on, because if the law is bad, you don't have to. So how does that work? You don't have
to vote guilty.
Yes, and you can't get in trouble for it, because
right.
And that's the irony of it. And they try to threaten you and make all, you know, but you just stand your ground and you stand up for your rights, and that's how it works.
Right, right.
And that's why
we'll get into that some more.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. But jury nullification, remember it, and better yet, do a research on it.
Yeah, Google
learn
it.
about it. Google
and
it,
go to FIJA, Fully Informed Jury Association.
Yes, definitely. And then you wrote up the marijuana policies
Politics.
of the media. Politics. Oh, I can't, my glasses. Oh, yeah,
marijuana politics and the media.
And the media, right.
Okay.
So tell us about that, and where you're at with that, and how that come about.
Well, you know, the media has always played an important aspect with marijuana. It's monitored the criminal enterprises. It's monitored marijuana as a recreational drug. It's monitored marijuana as a medicinal drug. And you know, and there's always been reporting about it, you know, and law enforcement and the judicial system have this scam called the war on drugs, but there never really was a war on drugs. And so what I hope to do here tonight is to inform people about the actual history and the politics that are behind marijuana, that law enforcement probably doesn't even want you to know about, but it's all true, and you can research it and you'll understand I'm telling you the truth. Okay, so people want their medicine, but law enforcement wants fat salaries. And I think that the municipal and the state politicians now are learning that these dispensaries, like in Oregon and Washington and California and Colorado, are making a lot of money from marijuana. And so, and it's state rights. The marijuana recreational lifestyle amongst consumers has played out in the media. Cultural art has resulted from it, as well as photography, and of course music, like reggae music, you know, has resulted from marijuana. Okay, so, and a lot of state legislatures wanted to decriminalize it, but those that don't want to keep it as a hardcore felony. And when they do that, what that has created is more money and taxation going to law enforcement, is created overflowing jails and prisons. And so the prison industries have made tons of money from marijuana related crime. And I think, you know, you would be surprised who invests in prison industries.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. For example, Wells Fargo Bank. You know, if you do any banking there, well, they invest in it. So, and then this has resulted in inflated law enforcement salaries. You know, some of these high-up cops are getting over $100,000 a year.
The prison industry is constantly lobbying the legislatures to create more prisoners, and because they're motivated to do so.
Right.
What's wrong with this picture?
And you know, you have cartels that are like in Colombia and Mexico, and this is known as the war on drugs. But a lot of people don't realize that CIA, U.S. Customs, DEA do control shipments. So it's not just the bad guys that are importing drugs into this country, and we never hear about that. And so anyway, cannabis taxation can contribute to a lot. They can contribute the money to a lot of projects. You know, for example, rehabilitation clinics and hospitals. You can use it for bridges and highways, and you can create employment and construction jobs. And those are just some of the reasons why this country should change the schedule of marijuana and make it a mainstream recreational drug and a medicinal drug. Okay, so marijuana taxation can eliminate a lot of drug enforcement personnel. And we don't need to be putting our money into all that. We need to be putting it into marijuana research and other projects. Okay, so this study is to educate people about the marijuana politics and how it's played an important part in America's medicinal, cultural use. And you'll learn that the United States Department of Justice, Treasury Department, Coast Guard, Department of Defense contractors have all unfairly profited from marijuana being illegal. Okay, now the marijuana law that was first passed was around 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. It goes that far back into America. And the law was written so that it was mandatory for settlers to actually plant hemp, you know? And for 20 years, hemp was used in the production of rope, okay? And a farmer, if the farmer owed the government taxes back then, he could pay for it in hemp. Try paying the government in hemp these days and see what happens, right? And so the United States Census Bureau in 1850 reported that there was 8,227 hemp plantations, okay? Each plantation was more than 2,000 acres. If it's less than 2,000 acres, it's a farm. If it's more than 2,000 acres, it's a plantation. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so now, during this time after 1619, I want to fast forward it to around 1848. And you had the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, and that was when they signed, and it ended the war between the United States and Mexico. And a lot of land was taken from Mexico. California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, all those states that we have today had at one time belonged to Mexico. And so all that territory now belongs to the United States, okay? And a westward expansion began. And Mexican immigrants migrated, and some of them worked on farms, and a lot of them worked on the railroads, you know, because this is when the Industrial Revolution is coming about in the United States. And these campesinos, which are Mexican laborers, brought marijuana seeds and plants to the United States. And so that resulted in California's first law against marijuana in 1913, okay? And the name marijuana, by the way, comes from a slang term for cannabis. And it was derived from Spanish pronunciations of the names Mary and Jane, okay? And those two names are common with military slangs for prostitutes and brothels. So I guess there was a lot of pot smoking in those places, right? Right. So marijuana came into popularity as a name for cannabis in the United States during the late 1800s. Okay, so marijuana was known as an Indian hemp, and the chief policy maker of the United States narcotics policy around that time was Hamilton Wright.
Excellent. Let me interrupt you there. We're going to have to take a break in a minute.
Okay.
And I've got to shut this down for a minute, but hey, I appreciate it. Now, this is great because we're going back ahead of 1937 and getting history. This is really interesting.
And I'm going to try to lead up to it all the way up to modern times.
That's great. So we're going to be right back and be here for the second half. We will be. Welcome back to the second half of episode 658, the Eugene Cannabis TV show. You got DanK here, and our friend Mark came in and told us about joint nullification and marijuana through the history of marijuana in the United States and how it got to be where it's at today. And so when we stopped at the end of the first half, we were talking about the year 19...
we were leading up to the late 1800s with Hamilton Wright, who was the chief policy maker of the United States narcotics policy at the time. There was another guy with the California Board of Pharmacy named Henry J. Finger. And Hamilton Wright had been trying to have marijuana made illegal. And Finger was anti-marijuana as well. And so California passed a legislation without anything printed about the law in the press. And it was a progressive era of narcotics passed as a technical amendment by the State Board of Pharmacy. So, you know, when you pass laws like this, the public has no idea what's going on. You know, it's kind of confided into these special interest groups. Okay. And so what that did was that created anti-Chinese prejudice because they targeted them for their opium. You know, because the Chinese laborers were also working on the railroads and migrating, and they had these opium dens and cocaine and marijuana. And even back then, the police used confidential informants just like they do now. And some of the same methods and techniques that are used in modern day times were used back then. And that's, you know, some of them develop and some of them stay the same, you know. So, I mean, you know, like back then you didn't have to be too technical to be a snitch. Nowadays, snitches are wearing wires and all the other stuff, you know. So the Chinese and the users of marijuana, like the Mexicans, were arrested. And they were arrested for possession not only of marijuana, but drug paraphernalia. You remember, you know, I'm sure you remember, we're both, you know, way over 50 years old. You know, you can remember a long time ago, you got caught with paraphernalia like a pot pipe or something, you could go to jail for that. All right, well, that's the way it was back then. And so in 1913, a law was passed in California that made the preparation of cannabis illegal. Okay, so we're moving up into the 1900s, and in the 1900s around New Orleans, Louisiana, you had a lot of jazz musicians playing, right? And it was, New Orleans is a port city, you know, and it still is a port city, and it's a place to party. And there was merchants and traders and sailors and gamblers and prostitutes and con men and thieves and gangsters. And so the law that was established in the state of California in 1913 that outlawed the preparation of hemp was being looked at. And in the New Orleans red light district known as Storyville, which had, what should I say? I don't want to say whorehouses, but well, I just did. Okay.
Houses of prostitution?
Houses of prostitution. They flourished with the jazz musicians, and they would play the jazz all night long. And they smoked marijuana, and they called it muta. And muta was smoked by a lot of different people in New Orleans. And the enemies of cannabis were always political. And in 1920, there was a guy named Oscar Dowling. He was the president of Louisiana State Board of Health. And he learned that a jazz musician had been convicted for forging a doctor's signature so he could buy marijuana. So, and you know, a long time ago, they used to have it in circuses where you could buy it. You know, they call it laughing weed and stuff. So it wasn't illegal like it is, like it was later on. So Dr. Dowling contacted this guy named John M. Parker. And Parker was the acting governor of Louisiana. And he told him that the drug marijuana was a threat to the city of New Orleans. And Governor Parker contacted the Surgeon General, Dr. Hugh Cummings, and to take action and control the trafficking of marijuana nationally. Okay, so it's all building up to go national. Okay, so in 1926, the New Orleans Morning Tribune, after having learned the subject of marijuana, they decided that they would increase their newspaper sales. They increased their newspaper sales by publishing stories about marijuana. And they realized when you publish stories about marijuana in your newspaper, people buy it. You know, they were curious about it. And then, you know, the editors were sensationalizing it. So, so about that time, there was a Dr. A.E. Frazier in New Orleans. He was known as a hellfire and brimstone physician, kind of like a Southern Baptist hellstone and brimstone preacher. And he told about how assassins during the Crusades would smoke marijuana, and then they go out and massacre Christians. And so, you know, you had that. They claimed that the mafia underworld gave marijuana to derelicts so that they would rape and murder for them. There was a lot of false stories going around about marijuana, and the lawmakers and the politicians were all for it because they wanted it illegal. Okay, and I'm going to get into that with Harry Anslinger. Okay, so the newspapers claimed that school children were buying marijuana from drug dealers, and this resulted in 60 children who were interviewed and a large police raid. And they started targeting pool halls and saloons and soda fountains at pharmacies, you know, where people would hang out. All right. So now we're getting into the 1900s, and Pancho Villa had started the Mexican Revolution, and he had his banditos. And Randolph Hearst, he's the one that owns the Chicago Tribune and the San Francisco Examiner. Well, he had an idea, you know, he could cut out the middleman and buy trees from Mexico and have DuPont manufacture paper, and he would get richer. So he was going to cut down 800,000 trees and have them sent probably by rail to the United States. Well, Pancho Villa showed up, probably with some marijuana smoking banditos, and said, you know, in the name of the Mexican Revolution, these trees will not be cut down. And he liberated the Mexican territory in the name of the peasants and the Mexican Revolution. And Randolph Hearst was furious because, you know, he was going to make money off of this, right? And Hearst used his media and his political connections to make problems for marijuana because he lost a lot of money because he could not process the trees. And Hearst and DuPont wanted to discourage the high quality paper manufacturing from hemp. Can you imagine if you plant hemp and produce a better paper, all the people that are in the tree business that were into pulp and paper, you know, they wouldn't be able to make any money. And so that's what happened. The San Francisco Examiner, Hearst uses newspapers to turn the public against marijuana. And the tactic they use, you know, if you spell marijuana the English way, it's M-A-R-I-H-U-A-N-A. But if you spell it the Spanish way, it's got a J-U, M-A-R-I-J-U-A-N-A. Well, back then, the Latino population in America wasn't as numerous as it is now. So when people were reading marijuana with a J, it was more foreign to them, and you know, since a lot of them were narrow-minded, it seemed more sinister because it was foreign like that, you know, because they weren't very well versed in the Spanish language. Okay, so that's what happened. So when Hearst lost these 800,000 acres, he hated Mexicans after that, and he was very prejudiced against Latinos. I think he was prejudiced against all the minorities, but he was very prejudiced against blacks and Latinos. And so DuPont had even considered replacing the low-quality paper produced by the trees with hemp. Okay, but Hearst waged an all-out propaganda against the prohibition of marijuana and alcohol and Pancho Villa and Mexico. Those were who he waged a war against, and he uses newspapers to do it. Okay, so that's what happened. Now, this is where where everything gets a little bit more evil with the marijuana. Director of Bureau of Narcotics, Harry J. Anslinger. Okay, he was born in 1892 and he died in 1975, and I'm glad he's dead.
Yeah.
But anyway, he became the United States' first director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics from 1930 to 1962. And Anslinger had this file called the Gore File of horrific stories, okay? And he used those stories to spread his anti-marijuana campaign. And it was later discovered that Anslinger's stories had been researched and taken from a yellow press. Back then, a long time ago, they had yellow journalism, you know, where they would make these sensational stories to get people to buy them.
Like the Globe and the Inquirer today.
Yeah, kind of like the rags you buy at the counter.
Yeah.
You know, a point of purchase item. I read them, and then the clerk will say, "Are you going to pay for that?" And I say, "No, it's a point of purchase item." I put it back. I just use it for when I'm waiting in line. And so they found out that of Anslinger's 200 stories, 198 of those stories were discovered to be completely false. Okay. The other two stories that were unaccounted for because they couldn't trace in the newspapers or in the media where the crimes were alleged to have occurred at all. Okay, so Anslinger's testimony before Congress resulted in the Marijuana Tax Act being passed by Congress. And the Marijuana Tax Act was the first time in America that the possession or sale of marijuana was a criminal offense under federal law. Okay, so Anslinger was a fanatic when it came to opposing marijuana, and he referred to it as Mexican opium. And so the yellow press purposely used fiction instead of facts so the stories would be very interesting to the readers. And so the yellow press started like around 1835 by James Bennett in the New York Herald. And the New York Herald was associated with Joseph Pulitzer and Randolph Hearst. As people said at the end of the century, the topics in Hearst and Pulitzer's papers could be divided into scandals, scares, and sob stories so that they could sell more newspapers. And so it wasn't uncommon to find stories about marijuana. And so what Anslinger did was he used this case called the Victor Licata case. The most sensational case Anslinger used from his Gore files. And he said that Victor Licata was a disturbed man with mental problems that was high on marijuana all the time. And that this young man got up one morning and he killed his parents, 2 brothers, and a sister with an axe. And Anslinger said Licata had been smoking marijuana cigarettes for 6 months. But the real truth of the story is a psychiatrist that examined Licata named Dr. H. Mason Smith stated that Licata's insanity was hereditary. And his mother and father, first cousins, granduncle, paternal cousins, and all, they'd all been committed to an insane asylum. It was hereditary.
We're out of time. We're going to have to continue this in another time. I really appreciate this. All this prehistory and fantastic. Thanks a lot, Mark. And
okay, well, thank you. I wish I could have gotten...